next to the door opening, so feel free and welcome to join for our almost the final session of this year's Idea Accelerator. It's our final real panel on this topic, and it's actually for me also like a bit of an emotional moment to also give the floor, to give my voice towards the moderator of tonight, a very dear friend of mine, and I was also honored to be a dear colleague of yours. I present to you Lauren Mason from the Paddy Ashdown Forum for our final session, Dare to Debate, Should State-Funded Media Outlets Be Banned?
Thanks very much, Lawrence. Good evening, everyone. So, as Lawrence has mentioned, we have chosen a very deliberately provocative title for this last session, hopefully to add a bit of energy to the end of the day. We're joined today by two excellent panelists. We have Ms. Yana Toom, who is an MEP from Estonia with the Renew Europe group, and Dr. Alexandra Borchardt, who's a senior research associate at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism and also a board member of the M100 Sans Souci colloquium. So we are starting from the premise whether state-funded media should be banned. That might sound controversial to many of you. That's because it is, but there are many people who would argue in favour of this statement, particularly citing the dangers of where the line between government-run media descends into propaganda. And I'm sure that I don't need to cite examples that we've seen on the outskirts of Europe, and actually even within Europe itself, when we heard earlier examples from colleagues from Hungary and Poland who told us about the dangers that are taking place there in terms of the quality and independence of state media and the information that is reaching citizens in a very biased manner. And even when the state governments are not in control of the editorial lines, you can always remember that old saying, which is, do not bite the hand that feeds you, and the questions of whether there is some elements of self-censorship of journalists who feel that they might be overcritical of the government and that may face repercussions for that. And then, of course, as liberals, you could argue that political structures should be designed imagining that your worst enemy could take power. And then the question is, do we want to have a big bulk of state-funded media outlets delivering information to our citizens? But today we're going to hear more from our speakers, whether they agree with this statement or not. So I will begin with Ms. Toom. What do you think? Should state-funded media be banned, or what would you say to those who might hold the viewpoints I've just elaborated?
Yes, thank you for having me. Thank you for everybody to trying to listen. I'm not just MEP, I'm former journalist. I used to be editor-in-chief of 3 big newspapers, which means that I kind of, I think I understand this thing from sort of both sides. My answer is no, and why? In fact, I don't believe that private media is by definition better than state-funded media. It depends on some other factors, and I believe these factors are if there exists a mechanism of democracy, freedom of speech, and media freedom in the state, if there exists the same mechanism of democracy, freedom of speech, and media freedom in media itself, about self-censorship or whatever, and if there is competition. If one of these components is lacking, then we can see certain risks, so to say, and at least one of them. And if all 3, it's very bad. And then the spectrum is from, avoiding some topics to absolutely shameful brainwash. It depends on the country, so to say. But even then, I see no point in banning. But in this case, we have to call this country we don't like, so to say, to ban its media. It's absolutely useless. We just cannot do it. I mean, it's not doable. This is kind of wish thinking. And some people believe that private media is by definition more honest than state-funded media. But in fact, this is not the case. It's absolutely the same. If there are these conditions also in private media, then it can be okay. But if you want some example, maybe the most famous example is Rupert Murdoch, who is the owner of The Sun and The Times, and who was a big supporter, and is a big supporter of Brexit. And in fact, he played a big role in it, which means that so much about free private media, so to say. You can also find somebody who will push his own agenda, his economic, political, whatever interest, So what we have, mechanism of democracy, freedom of speech, and of course competition. But if it comes to biased or less biased media, I believe that state media is able to fulfill tasks which private media cannot, especially in small countries. For instance, I don't know, articles about culture are not things which are kind of, clickbait, If you have to earn money, you avoid these topics. Or, I mean, I don't know, amount of advertising can be absolutely enormous in private media, which is not the case in state media. And there are some boring topics, so to say. I'm working in the European Parliament, and I know very well, if I want, so to say, to sell to journalists something we're working on, it's much more attractive to write that we are, I don't know, looking at the color of fried potatoes or at the shape of cucumbers, This is what so to say, people are interested in. And if you say something about, I don't know, Audiovisual Media Services Directive, it sounds boring and nobody wants to write about it. So there are certain tasks which can be fulfilled by state-funded media. And just some examples. Everybody knows what is Press Freedom Index. According to Press Freedom Index in previous year, the most free media is in Sweden, Finland, Norway. In Sweden, all Yle channels are broadcasted free to air, and they are all funded by state, absolutely, 100%. In Sweden, the press is subsidized by the government and is owned by many actors, but still it's funded by the government. In Norway, basically the same, which means that state-funded media is a mirror of the state. And if we want, in terms of democracy, freedom, and everything related to it, and if we want to ban certain state-funded media, we have to look at the state, maybe honestly say to ourselves that, we'd better ban this government, but we cannot do so. So I believe that, no, everything has to be in balance, and also private media can be absolutely the same. And I believe that if it comes to Hungary, that I know for sure there are some private-owned media outlets which are also doing the same, which is done by state media. So no reason. Thank you.
Okay, some very convincing arguments there. Dr. Borchardt, what's your view on the matter? Should state-funded media be banned?
Well, if I was joking, I would say it depends on the state. First of all, I would like to say that there's a big difference between state media and public service media, because public service media is media that is controlled by the public, that should be controlled by the public, and there should be no state media without public control, because if there's money of the public going into that media, people deserve that their interests are represented in all their diversity and all their needs. We heard about that before. Just imagine we only had private media. Think about the social media accounts. Think about Elon Musk now buying Twitter and shutting it down because he doesn't like what he sees. Or think about Mark Zuckerberg deciding there's no room for news on Facebook any longer, because what people really would like to do is connecting with their friends and forget about these news. Actually, they did that at some point and really ruled down the exposure to news that the public saw. So if we have big information monopolies, if our public sphere is entirely controlled by private monopolies who are not democratically controlled, who can do whatever they see fit, would that be an information space that you would like to see? I'm sure you wouldn't like to see that. Yeah, and really state media, or as I would like to call it, public service media, they can fulfill things that private media increasingly has less space to do. They can go where there's no commercial success waiting. They can do different things, maybe investigative reporting about political issues where there's really no money to be made from. State media or public service media, they're also required to reflect society the way it is in all its diversity. So they're really subject to much more public scrutiny about, are they really fulfilling their standards? Whereas private media can at any time say, oh, let's focus on this very lucrative audience, this single audience that makes us money, and let's ignore the rest. Let's put up a paywall. And I'm not speaking against paywalls here. I think commercial media are important. Plurality of media is important. We have the space and we need competition, definitely. But state media or public service media, as I say, can go where the others can't go, really. But what's really, really important is that the conditions are right. There needs to be an independent control. There need to be bodies that control public service media. Also, being public service media doesn't mean that you can do just almost anything and waste the taxpayers' money on anything that you see fit. You need also to prove that what you're doing is right, that you're actually doing stuff for different audiences, that you have an impact. Because a lot of public money can be wasted of things if people are doing just hobby journalism or whatever their biggest stars would like to do. So there needs to be accountability, and this is really the important thing. But public service media also, they need to are also there to develop formats for parts of the public that have traditionally been underserved by commercial media, even by public service media. We have honestly to say, and we heard about that today, that not every element, every segment of the public has been served. It's media journalism has been very much catering to the well-educated who really understand what's going on. But there's an obligation really for public service media to go where everyone is, because really it's the people's money and everyone pays the license fee. Using state funds requires particular responsibility for fairness, equality, diversity, and user-friendliness. That is why public service media is so important. It is the best medicine against polarization in society. Just think about the United States, one of the most polarized democratic societies I can think of these days. There is no public service media to speak of, just public service radio that does a great job, but is really also catering to the elites. And there are lots of news deserts because local journalism is under pressure. And really, do we want to have that? You can see where that leads to. Public service media are a pillar for democracies, and that's why they need all of our support. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra. Right, well, I see there was a tendency in both cases to disagree with the statement, so I'm going to allow myself to be a bit of a devil's advocate and push back a little bit on some of those points. So maybe, Jana, to start with you. You mentioned, I think very accurately at the end, that state-funded media are in many ways, sort of the state and the healthiness of state-funded media represent the healthiness of the state. They mirror the current attitudes of the state. So what happens if a state has already descended beyond the realms of a healthy democracy? Is that not the time when we are left with only with the choice of removing the public funded media?
Who are we in this case? I mean, can you imagine that there is anybody, I don't know where, in Brussels or somewhere, and every time after democratic election in any member state, we look at them, you are allowed to continue and you are not. Kind of doesn't work, right? I really believe that it's kind of wish thinking, We can do nothing. Yes, we know very well what happened, I don't know, in Hungary, when from interview from Hungarian journalists, we know that during, I don't know, refugee crisis, they were not allowed to show children, for instance. For they were pushing people back, so it was not allowed to show children. And that was a rule. But nowadays, what we can do, what is the remedy, Of course, it's media literacy, and now fortunately, we're having internet, which means that, if people want to get information, they will get it, especially if we're speaking about European Union. But on the other hand, in my home country, in Estonia, for instance, now after this Putin's aggression against Ukraine, we banned all Russian TV channels, which we had a lot of. Of course, you can ban things, but if you are banning things, you have to provide alternative. I mean, the Russian-speaking population in Estonia has no alternative today. I mean, it's like few hours a day, and you cannot compare it with this hours and hours and hours people used to watch. This is also, slippery thing.
Okay, all right. And Alexandra, I want to come back to the question that you raised about the editorial boards. So if we start from the assumption that we're in a liberal democracy, then we also have trust in those editorial boards or those independent control bodies. Now let's imagine that we're in a country where we have no faith in the government and who they're selecting to sit on those editorial boards. Do you still think that the importance is as valid?
Well, I mean, this happens all the time, but really the media can only be, or the media landscape can only be as good as the government. So it is really like, who should, for example, ban state media if the democracy is going down the drains? Then if democracy is gone, then basically everything is gone. All kinds of things are gone. So there is no one really who could ban state media in that case. So it is really, obviously there are political appointments and nothing is ever perfect, but nothing is ever perfect in democracy. But at least you need to have an attempt for democratic control. And if you don't believe in democracy, well, probably no one can really save you, because the people have to rise up then. It's up to the people to really demand that they want to live in a democracy, and lots of brave people are rising up and in countries and where they face jail or retribution. So, but you can't really impose a democracy from above. It needs to be the people who are strengthening the democracy, and that's also why this is so important to have a lively media landscape and a diverse media landscape, and to have a mix of all kinds of media outlets, publicly funded, privately funded, foundation funded, whatever. So media pluralism is so important to keep democracies alive.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So pluralism is the key then, both state-funded and private-funded. I want to actually turn to the audience now and ask if anyone is feeling like they'd like to get involved in the debate. I'm happy to give you a 1-minute slot if you want to speak and share some arguments that you would like to share, either in favour of banning state-funded media, if you're feeling brave, or reasons why you believe in the importance of perhaps having private-funded media or a plurality. Is there anyone who wants to offer their voice to the debate in this way? Yeah. We can move to questions if you prefer, yes.
Yes, sorry, my name's Sandra Kaduri from Keeping Channels Open. I just wanted to say that for me, one of the scariest things is when you've got a supposedly independent media, for example, like the Daily Telegraph in the UK, but it's full of government voices all the time. And all you get are politicians writing in there, and then it is absolutely supporting the government agenda, but it is still promoted as an independent media. So what bothers me is when something's pretending to be independent and private, but it is actually now becoming the voice of the government and promoting their agenda. So what would you want to do to sort of, make sure that people know that what is happening and there's not enough transparency? And if people were more aware of who is controlling the content and who was actually writing the content, it's now personal opinion, it's not objective journalism anymore. And that's it, that division, that is just gone, that distinction. Anyway, what do you think about that?
Thank you. I'll just see if there are any more questions in the room that we can maybe group them together. Yeah, there's a question from Gavin.
I just wanted to ask, really, there seems to be quite a lot here saying, we need to reflect democracy, we need to reflect what people want. But one of the issues we've had in Hungary, this is exactly what Orban says. He says, people have voted for me, therefore we need to reflect the democratic will of the Hungarian people, and that means the Hungarian media needs to reflect the Fidesz two-thirds majority government. So isn't the issue here really a question of pluralism? How do we, under whatever circumstances, whether it's majority private or majority state ownership or some combination between, how do we ensure there is a sufficient choice in the media market for people to be exposed to different points of view, if that's what they want to be exposed to? Rather than thinking about whether it's state or private, the important thing is variety.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And I think there was one more question from Sven.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a question, but it's a reflection on what Dr. Borchardt was saying. While I agree with so many of the statements, I have one reservation. That is the rise of populism is obviously unplaying or like unwinding the liberal democratic institutions. Like they first go after the rule of law, for example, for undermining the liberal democratic system. And the same is for independent media, right? So you want to avoid that if you have a public broadcaster, that at some point there is a chance of actually capture by the populists or by forces that are anti-democratic. So it's like kind of Popper's paradox of the intolerant, right? At one point we have to make this system resilient. So what is the mechanism in which way we can make it resilient? Because all that you say is correct, right? But we don't have perfection in democracy, but what we can think about is how to make this system so resilient that even if Trump came to power, the rule of law was not touched in the United States. How can we make the media sector so resilient that even if Orban comes to power and wants to capture that, it is not allowed to be captured? And that's the question from an institutional and therefore from, I guess, liberal perspective, if that makes sense, my rambling here.
Yeah, thanks. Do you want to come in the first question, Alexandra?
Sure, I mean, I absolutely agree. Separation of powers is the basic foundation of democracy, that one institution can't overpower the others, and that's actually what happens in Poland or Hungary too, that the lines are blurred. Political appointments to governing bodies or to supposedly independent bodies, this is really when it all goes down the drain. And actually, the point you brought in about, what you said is really, and I think this is a very important point, more transparency about ownership, transparency who is on these boards, transparency who writes for or who broadcasts or whatever. I think this is really what people deserve. Transparency where the interests are, what political affiliations people have. And I think we could do a lot about transparency, and I really hope that the Media Freedom Act will also be a lot about that. Media capture, of course, is a problem, or it is a challenge, and it's happened, in quite a few countries. And in fact, we are really going backwards in many countries. There's research on this, that there's more media capture now than we talked about this already, or we heard about this already today than maybe 10 years ago. But really, all these mechanisms that make sure that there's transparency and that there's a plurality of media, and that there's also an opportunity for those who might get shut down by governments or might get their public advertising restricted or whatever, that they can appeal, that they have institutions to appeal to, that media freedom and press freedom is just such a value in our societies. I think this is really important. So strong institutions are actually the ones that can really save us from democracies to decline. And media independent media is one institution, but it's only one of them. So we need independent courts, independent judiciary. We need independent bodies.
Yes, if I may, there is no debate, you see, we are kind of absolutely on the same side, but still, I'm very much agree, but just to add some things, I really believe in professional standards. I really believe in codes of conduct. They work. I mean, they actually work. And, but, I don't want to sound like dinosaurs, but believe me, 20 years ago, media was absolutely different. I mean, when there was no social media. Now, basically, all news outlets are competitive with social media. Politicians are speaking with people via Twitter, 140. I mean, it's nothing, This is a problem, No time for fact-checking, nothing. And it's, of course, we're kind of speaking of how to treat one part of the body, not paying attention to another one. We're in very different environment now, and it's like very complicated, really. And of course, we're trying to do something. I mean, from a political level, for instance, now European Commission came and with initiative, and Parliament supported it largely. I don't know, SLAP. Have you heard about it? Something, strategic lawsuits against public participation. When somebody goes to court and demands, I don't know, 2 million from journalists who said something about him. And this is very spread practice in some European countries. We are trying to defend media, of course, but still you asked how to create this, how to protect this media space. Media space is not something which can be protected by state entirely, you know. This is about also media literacy. And I was born in Soviet Union, and my grandfather, during Soviet times, he was listening to Voice of America, then he was listening to Radio Svoboda, then he was listening to Estonian news, then he was listening to Moscow news, and then he tried to understand what is actually going on. You know, but nowadays, I mean, I have a feeling that some people just forgot about this skill, which is really very important. And this is important, you know. We don't Google anymore. We see something, you know. We don't check these links and so on and so forth. And of course, if media is competing with Twitters and Facebook and whatever, they just don't have time for that. And that's the problem. But this is the role coming back, which can be successfully fulfilled by state-funded media.
Mm-hmm. I'll just take one more question. I think Marcus had a question.
So I guess my question is whether it's really about state-funded media or whether it's about regulation. Because, yeah, if we're looking more at the UK, there are some incredibly good news outlets in ITV, Channel 4, and it's about the Ofcom and how competent or sometimes how incompetent, but it's about the competence of the regulator.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we're coming to an end now. So perhaps, I know that Alexandra, you wanted to add something. Can I ask each of you to give us your 1 minute kind of closing statement on whether or not you think public media should be banned, and if there was something you wanted to pick up on the previous comments, please do.
I have to add something because I'm not for banning social media. I think social media has really enriched the media landscape, and it's great because it's also given groups or people or voices, outlets that they haven't had before, and it's also kept traditional media on their toes. I think many traditional media are doing a much better job now in being closer to the audiences than they did before. And let's face it, journalism hasn't always been that brilliant in the old times. And my second thing would be, don't underestimate the audience. It's not that social media brought about Brexit. It's much more, for example, the British media system where actually lots of news outlets have been on the conservative side, and they have been pro-Brexit. And even if there had not been any social media around, this is just reflected a polarized society that was polarized between the London bubble and basically the other parts of Britain. And I think it really brought about some social phenomenon that hadn't been addressed before. So we really have, the new media are also giving us the opportunity to bring in voices that haven't been heard before. And I think this is really an important, it's actually valuable. But obviously there needs to be regulation to bring back to make sure that actually public values are reflected in the media landscape.
Thank you. Jana?
I again can only agree. The only thing is that I don't believe in regulations that much. I kind of believe in agreements. But it's again, I'm coming back to my statement in the beginning that in certain terms, media is a mirror of society, and you can do nothing about that. You know, this is just, you know, if society is mature enough, if people understand that, you know, democracy is not something we just have by definition, we have to fight for it, then we have a strong media. And I believe that in some member states, which we already pointed out, not very politely today, you know, it will also come time, but still, we all are under certain risk at the moment. And coming from Estonia, I just see, again, about role of social media, you know, how many different terrible fake news and whatever are coming just in last weeks. And during pandemic, it was absolutely awful, you know, all kind of conspiracy theories, which where the people were sitting at home, you know, and just, you know, going crazy. This is of course a problem, but I again believe that this is a mirror of society, and media is as strong as we are.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you to both of our speakers and to all of our audience. I sense that the debate is probably going to carry on over a drink. But before that, I'm going to hand the floor to Daniel Haddock for wrapping up the conference.
Yeah, but first of all, a warm applause for Lauren Mason, Dr. Alexandra Borchardt, and Jana Thom for this great Dare to Debate. Thank you very much.